This video is sponsored by the International Society for Primal People. Bigfoot of the Blues, Chapter 3. The author and the Bigfoot of the Blues. How I met up with the subject and a bit of background on me and it, that is. When it comes to this subject, I'm often asked one of two questions, two queries, but with nearly the same words. You don't believe in this Bigfoot thing, do you? Or a little more objective question, do you believe in Bigfoot? When I respond that I do believe, I usually get this additional comment, you do? I think you can understand the hesitancy to answer either of the above, both seemingly already answered, but I do, and so I shall share with you what I have seen and read. Many books over the years, and have heard, and have experienced with others who have spent more time than I in the research of this most fascinating subject. So, in the words of another speaker on a similar subject, bearing in mind that these things don't exist and making every allowance for your natural conviction that they could not, let us proceed. My own involvement with what I call the Bigfoot of the Blues story began in 1965, when a man came into the Union Bulletin newsroom to report some really big, human-like footprint tracks that he'd seen on the Upper Mill Creek Road. This story I wrote for the paper, made the AP wire, and was spotted by Roger Patterson of Yakima, who came over that weekend to investigate. Patterson is the man who 2 years later shot the only film of a moving Bigfoot on a trip into the mountains near Willow Creek, California. While some Hollywood makeup people agree it could be duplicated, they also agreed that it would take a few $1 million to do it. Patterson is dead, but Bob Gimlin, the man who was with him that day, still resides in Yakima and still swears they saw a Bigfoot. While Patterson went back to his self-appointed role of Bigfoot seeker and part-time rodeo performer, I continued my own role of newspaper reporter for the Walla Walla Union Bulletin. This job, from 1951 to 1971, was as the paper's roving reporter, covering a news beat of 12 counties of southeastern Washington and northeastern Oregon. In the heart of this sizable piece of northwest geography lay the Blue Mountains. This ancient range of mountains stretches from southeast Washington diagonally through Oregon. It is a popular outdoors mecca for anglers, deer and elk hunters, and others who would enjoy a host of outdoors recreation. It obviously was also a popular playpen for Bigfoot, or family of Bigfoots, as evidence of 1982 and the next 10 years were to prove. At the northern end of the Blue Mountains is located the sizable area of the Mill Creek watershed, prime source of water for the city of Walla Walla since 1918. In 1978, by action of the U.S. Congress, an even bigger chunk of the Blues was set aside as the Wenaha-Tucannon Wilderness Area. It is within this area of hundreds of square miles that so many sightings of Bigfoot and his tracks and other evidence have been seen in the last decade. And what a decade was launched in June of 1982, when U.S. Forest Service patrol rider Paul Freeman came face to face with a Bigfoot. That story, in detail, and what happened, is of course what this book is all about. But when Freeman, who rode the Mill Creek watershed to keep humans and cattle out, reported what he'd seen, the Bigfoot of the Blues story really took off. For me, reporting the many incidents and sightings since then, it was especially momentous. For the Bigfoot world at large, the sighting was also a major story. The Bigfoot activity in the watershed and the adjoining wilderness area has drawn all the big names of that Bigfoot world, such as John Green, Bob Titmus, Rene DeHenden, Grover Krantz, and many others. All that interest has culminated in very recent years, 91 and 1992, with the findings of huge Bigfoots stretching for miles, yes, miles, of something coming down out of the mountains to roam around the ranch homes of people as close as 7 miles from Walla Walla. As it has been with any subject of interest to me in my reporter career, I started, in 1965, saving material related to Bigfoot. I now have a couple of filing cabinet drawers filled with newspaper and magazine clippings, as well as a shelf of books on the subject. I have also become a member of some organizations which seek the truth in the matter. This includes an informal gathering of a dozen or so Walla Wallans who have followed a lot of Bigfoot tracks and many other indications of the creature. While the bulk of Bigfoot sightings of the animal itself and of its tracks and other vestiges have been in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California, many have been found right close to home. The Blue Mountains have become a prime Bigfoot area. A reason for that, of course, is the Mill Creek watershed, closed to mankind except for a short elk season, and since 1978, when it was created right alongside the Wanahatu Canyon Wilderness area. Thus, you have an area about 25 air miles east to west and the same north to south in which Bigfoot can roam practically at will. Man can't get into the area except on foot or horseback, and the watershed only a few on a special hunt permit. One of the most comprehensive surveys of sightings of tracks and of Bigfoot itself was done in 1988 by an avid Puget Sound area researcher and tracker, Kevin Lindley. The wall chart he and his associates assembled has some 700 sightings and thousands of footprints of the creature. Lindley notes that thousands more likely went unreported because of fear of ridicule. The chart lists sightings up and down the Pacific coast, ranging from Ketchikan, Alaska, to the Mammoth Lakes south of San Francisco. Lindley had assistance from all the top Bigfoot trackers and research people and their reports. These people included Roger Patterson, Ivan Sanderson, Rene DeHenden, John Green, Grover Krantz, Paul Freeman, Wes Summerlin, and several others. The last I heard of Lindley, he was living in Auburn, Washington. While Lindley's chart records thousands of tracks, we had thousands of tracks in a fairly small area a few miles east of Walla Walla in 1991 and 1992, and many, many more besides. Couldn't these tracks be faked? Yes, and there probably have been more than a few done around here, as in many other places where such tracks have been found. But the huge numbers of tracks I have seen in the most isolated areas make me feel the hoaxes are few and far between, at least in the really backwoods region of the Blues. For one thing, any hoaxer quite likely is going to make his tracks where he is sure they will be found. For another thing, he'd better be making his feet out of something darn clever, because I'm convinced an expert wildlife tracker will spot the fact that fake tracks are not alive. I have followed some of the best such trackers of beasts and man, and have learned a lot in the past few years of looking for Bigfoot. One basic is that a thing called live tracks. A good tracker can tell pretty quickly if he's looking at a track made by a live creature. He can tell you pretty much everything the creature was doing, as well as its physical dimensions. I'd like to share with you the findings of two trackers. One is from the old school, as Indians learned it, and the other is of the modern school of tracking and outdoor survival. I've already mentioned Wes Summerlin, a guy with whom I've shared a lot of miles of horsebacking and experiencing the blues like no other. Of himself, Wes had this to say: "My brother Swede and I have been trackers, packers, and guides in these mountains for most of our lives. All through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Swede and I spent a lot of time in these mountains tracking down lost people. Swede raised a family of 4 children by trapping and hunting mostly. We are Indian white mixture, partially raised on a reservation. We were learning to track and hunt by the time we were 3 years old and were fishing by 4 years old. In this period, we were shown and told about tracks of the wild man of the mountains. You call him Bigfoot and Sasquatch. We were also told not to pursue such tracks until we were much older. Then, when the tracks were found coming out of the mountains to Mill Creek in 1991, Wes and Swede spent a lot of days scouring them, back and forth. Here's some of Wes's report. Those tracks came down through a fall-tilled field with approximately 10 to 12 degrees pitch. Tracks were 3 to 4 inches deep in the ground. A 350-pound man standing beside them sank only 3/4 of an inch into the ground. The Bigfoot tracks were 15 inches long and 7.5 inches wide, packing no mud. The stride was approximately 30 inches, with toes pointed slightly out for balance, tracks separated for balance instead of on and in line as normal. In the snow, the tracks were 5 to 16 inches deep, while the 350-pound man's tracks sank only an inch or less. Wes Summerlin, a guy who would have fit into our nation's fur trapping era like a hand in a glove, will have more to say about this and a lot more about the Bigfoot of the Blues. Stay tuned. The modern-day tracker is Greg May, instructor of outdoor survival classes at WSU. He is a graduate of the Tom Brown School of Survival in New Jersey. May has been here on many trips to check on Bigfoot tracks. He was here when we found the 1991 tracks, one of several internationally known Bigfoot authorities who visited. I cite the following from his report. I am 90% certain that this site is valid and not fabricated. I allow a 10% error for the possibility of the development of a fabricated prosthetic which the necessary flexile characteristic inherent. May also noted that a major point in reaching his conclusions was that proper indicator pressure releases were evident in many instances. This rules out the possibility of hand tooling, barefoot human, or a flexible crude prosthetic. In other words, if you're going to fake a Bigfoot track, you'd better be good and don't just carve a foot out of wood or plastic and stamp it in the soft ground. The resulting tracks will not be what tractors call alive, and the good trackers will know it. May's full report on the 1991 tracks will be found later in this book. Naturally, with all this reading and writing about Bigfoot of the Blues for a decade or more, I have some opinions on what I think Bigfoot is. I equate the creature with animals, such as bears, but he is one which just happens to be bipedal or walks upright like a man. A bear, of course, is not upright, but is down on all fours, only occasionally rising for a better view of what he thought he smelled downwind. Bigfoot, from all I can learn, apparently uses no tools or fire and forges constantly for food of all kinds, vegetation or flesh. Being a creature of 7 to 8 foot tall and probably weighing 600 to 800 pounds or more, it would require constant stoking, I'm sure. We have found evidence that Bigfoot is stealing stashed deer kills and cougars here, and it seems likely that it could take a toll of newborn elk calves. Another observation of mine is the seeming lack of interest on the part of science to nail down this phenomenon. A few belong to the International Society of Cryptozoology, the study of unknown animals. This group does explore and holds seminars on the subject around the world each year. I'll talk at length later on the formation in 1983 and the goals of the ISC. Grover Krantz, professor of anthropology at WSU, is one of the few who has spent several years investigating Bigfoot here and in Canada and China. He is convinced there is something out there because of the amount of evidence. I like Krantz's statement on the animal. As Sherlock Holmes put it, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Even if none of the hundreds of Bigfoot sightings had ever occurred, we would still be forced to conclude that a giant bipedal primate does indeed inhabit the forests of the Pacific Northwest. One more thing about this Bigfoot creature. It's a highly fascinating subject and can gain a real grip on your mind. Paul Freeman left here in 1982 and returned to Western Washington to live, but only for a short time. In a couple of years, he came back to Walla Walla and has lived here ever since. He has seen a Bigfoot on 2 other occasions since an '82 meeting and probably reports more tracks and other evidence than anyone else. He's also up in the mountains 2 or 3 days a week. The hairy, man-like creature he came upon nearly 10 years ago is something he'll never forget. It also represents something which has become an obsession, I guess, for he feels he must someday bring home absolute proof of a Bigfoot in order to vindicate his first encounter. End of chapter.